Hi, my name is Beth, and welcome to my June 2024 Reading Journal Wrap-Up. I'm starting off with my cover page. After last month's cover page fiasco, I played it safe this month. I'm using my Kobo to measure 2 rectangles of scrapbook paper to glue onto the page, and what do you know? My Kobo is out of battery. What a surprise! I'm adding a quote to the left side of the page. The quote I've chosen for this month is, "It's a miracle to realize that somebody loves you." This is from If Beale Street Could Talk by James Baldwin, which I read last month. I thought this quote was great. It's so simple, but it's beautiful. And this is where I made a really dumb mistake. For some reason, I wrote July as the month instead of June and didn't even notice. I do eventually catch the mistake, but for now, that finishes off the monthly cover page. The first book I read in June was The Hero of Ages by Brandon Sanderson. This is the third and final book in the Mistborn Era 1 trilogy, and it has taken me 3 years to finish this series. I don't read a ton of series. I think I've mentioned before that I'm terrible at reading them, and this is why. I read The Final Empire in the summer of 2022, so finishing this book has been a long time coming, especially since I told myself I wouldn't start any new high fantasy series until this book was done. In my defense, I did not think it would take me this long to finish this series. I actually started The Hero of Ages back in March and read 70% of it then, but I couldn't finish it until June because I was waiting for my audiobook loan to renew from the library. So it's been a long journey, but I'm finally here. I don't want to say too much about this book because it's the last one in a trilogy, but where the first 2 books dealt with more centralized conflicts, now Vin, Elend, and the rest of their colleagues are facing a more global conflict. Each book features its own antagonist, so there's a new evil entity that threatens the very world itself. So it's up to everyone to better understand their enemy, the history of their world, and the mysterious figure known as the Hero of Ages if they want to stand a chance at saving the world. I really enjoyed the first 2 books in this series. This is my first forte into Brandon Sanderson's work, and in a nutshell, I've been very impressed, very entertained. So it's a bit upsetting to admit that I was actually pretty disappointed with this final book. I really liked book 2, The Well of Ascension, and to me, the series felt pretty final at the end of that book. I could see what still needed to be revealed, but it just felt like all these major beats had been finished and something completely new was being introduced as an excuse to have a third book. Having now finished the series, I think there's validity to both sides of that argument. There were definitely things that needed greater exploration: the history of the world, the political standings, and the identity of the Hero of Ages needed to be confirmed. All these things played a part in how the story finished, but because a lot of things seemed to get wrapped up at the end of book 2, the majority of this book felt boring and extremely drawn out. By the halfway point, barely anything had happened. In Vin's storyline, this goose chase she's been on has not revealed much. Tensoon is on trial in his storyline, but again, by the halfway point, the same trial is still going on. And I liked this storyline, but it felt like it wasn't going anywhere. The POV switches didn't bother me in the first 2 books, but in this one, it felt like everyone's story was going on for forever. There just seemed to be a lack of progression. It felt like we were stuck in one spot for so long and no one was making any progress. Something I'd heard a lot of praise for going into this book was the character arcs. So I was excited about seeing them unfold, but I found them to be a bit lackluster. I do think that Elend had the strongest arc across the entire series. I do think there are flaws for him in this book, especially in regard to a lack of trial and error with the new skills he has, but I think overall there's a solid arc for him. In book 1, he's a young man who thinks he knows everything because he's read everything. In book 2, we see how relying on book knowledge isn't going to equal leadership ability. And finally, in this book, we see him gain actual experience. I think his arc makes sense, and the way his story comes together in the end reflects that. I don't believe that Vin has an arc in this book. I really think she peaked in book 2, but I was very disappointed in Sazed's storyline. Everyone said that this was the one to watch for because it was going to be spectacular, but like most of the book, I just found it to be boring. Sazed is a religious character in the first 2 books, but he's experiencing a crisis of faith in this book. For 90% of the time, Sazed is pessimistic about religion and faith, but then he suddenly comes to a realization at the end, and everything is fine again. The majority of Sazed's chapters are just about religious doubt, which gets boring after a while. I can definitely see how he's different at the beginning and at the end of the book, but I don't see the actual progression over the course of the whole story. I decorated this spread with a sticker sheet from Marigona Suli Art. The pink flower washi tape is also from her. The bookshelf washi tape is from Hobby Lobby, and the butterfly and circle stickers and the grid washi tape are from my local dollar store. I know I've really focused on my negative opinions, but it wasn't all bad. I thought the ending was paced well, and I thought Brandon Sanderson did a great job at connecting information across all 3 books. But I just found this book to be very slow and quite uneventful. I'm definitely going to read more from Sanderson in the future because I did really like the first 2 books, but I gave The Hero of Ages 3 stars. I'm definitely glad I read this series though, and I'm intrigued to see where his universe goes. After finishing up this spread, I finally realized that I made the mistake on the cover page. Oh, it's June. It's not July. So I quickly changed out July for June. Some of the scrapbook paper ripped, but I don't think it's that noticeable, and it doesn't bother me enough to replace the whole page. Halfway through June, I traveled across the country to Victoria, British Columbia. My brother and sister-in-law live in Victoria, and they went to France for a few weeks, so I flew over to watch their dog. So I'm set up at this new table for the rest of the video. The next book I read was one I started on the flight over, and it's The Atlas 6 by Olivia Blake. When I think of book talk books, this one is at the top of my list. There are book talk books that were popular before TikTok, like The 7 Husbands of Evelyn Hugo, The Song of Achilles, and ACOTAR, but I think this was one of the first indie books to get traditionally published because of book talk. The Atlas 6 really paved a way for traditional publishers to take indie publishing and book talk seriously, so even though I was hesitant to pick this up, I was still curious to see what this book had to offer. The Atlas 6 is about a magical institute called the Alexandrian Society that only accepts 6 students every 10 years. Each student is highly skilled in a particular magical field, and the society offers them an opportunity to enhance their skills and gain access to advanced resources. This book follows the latest 6 students as they learn about the greater magical world. Unfortunately, not all 6 students will graduate. By the end of the year, only 5 students will leave the society, a life of fame and money ahead of them. As tension grows regarding who will graduate and who won't, the society's secrets begin to unfold. I was skeptical about this book before reading it because I don't tend to have the best luck with books popular on TikTok. I think for every TikTok book I like, there's like 8 I don't. But I find myself in this perpetual cycle because TikTok is very influential. Unfortunately, this book is one of the 8 that I did not enjoy. There's a number of reasons that contribute to me not liking this book, and the first one is that there isn't really a plot. Something that I think some writers don't realize is that every book in a series needs to have its own arc. So there should be a beginning, middle, and end to every book, and each of those books should contribute to the overarching story that covers the entire series. This book doesn't have that. There's no independent ending in this book. It only serves the overarching story. I think part of the reason this book doesn't have a conclusive ending is because it lacks a plot. We have all these people at the society, but I don't know why they're there. The purpose of the society is never explained, so every chapter leads to nothing because it's unclear how any kind of development is relevant to their studies. In addition to a lack of a story arc, the characters lack arcs as well. Every character stays the exact same throughout the entire book. Libby and Nico begin as rivals and they end as rivals. Callum begins as insufferable and he ends as insufferable. No one changes at all. No one has any kind of development either intellectually or socially. I also just found certain characters to be more important than others. It's clear that Olivia Blake liked Parisa and Tristan best because their chapters share the most development, but Raina and Callum just feel like wasted space. I was really frustrated by the amount of information in this book that was revealed off the page. Libby has a boyfriend named Ezra who is not at the society. Their relationship changes over the course of the book. However, most of the changes happen during other characters' POV chapters. Libby will say that she spoke to Ezra on the phone, but we almost never see those conversations. The relationships between some of the students is vague because the seemingly important moments get cut off. Information about the society is just never explained on the page itself. The book does a lot of implying, which isn't necessarily as effective as just explaining it. I used a dark academia sticker sheet from Jolico to decorate this page. While I don't normally match my spreads to the books, I have lots of academia-themed stationery, so it just made sense. I used an hourglass sticker from an Etsy seller called Mary Ann Sew, and all the washi tapes are from Hobby Lobby. The things I did like about this book make up a very small portion of the story. I thought Nico's friend Gideon was the most interesting character, but he wasn't even at the society. I thought the ending was a bit abrupt, but interesting, and I found Parisa's chapters to be intriguing. But these things just aren't enough for me to give this book any real praise. I gave the Atlas 6 2 stars. I won't be continuing this series. While I'm willing to try something different from Olivia Blake, it probably won't happen anytime soon. The last book I read in June was Normal People by Sally Rooney. This book is incredibly divisive online. People either love it or they absolutely hate it. And even though I've never seen it, I feel like people share similar opinions about the show as well. I went into this book feeling very hesitant because of its reputation. I knew going in that it didn't have any quotation marks, which also made me a bit nervous. I attempted to read a book in the past that didn't have quotation marks, and I couldn't even tell if the book was in first person or third person, so I was hesitant to read this, but excited to see what all the hype was about. Normal People is about two young people, Connell and Marianne. The story begins in 2011 when they are still in high school. Connell is a smart, quiet, middle-class guy, but his looks, his friends, and his spot on the football team provide him with popularity. Marianne, on the other hand, is considered the weird girl. She comes from a very rich family, but she doesn't have any friends, and she's criticized for the way she dresses and behaves. Connell's mom works as a cleaner for Marianne's family, and through this association, Connell and Marianne develop a friendship that quickly turns into a friends with benefits situation. However, because of their social statuses at school, everything needs to be kept a secret. The story follows Connell and Marianne over 5 years as they finish high school and enter university. We watch as their statuses shift and their relationship changes. We see how different things in their lives pull them apart, but how they always end up back together eventually. I can definitely see why this book has readers divided. I think this book is a great study on growing up and understanding oneself, But at the same time, this book features a lot of repetitive story beats with Connell and Marianne's romantic relationship. There's a lot of opportunities for identifying with the main characters, but there are also plenty of times where communication is ignored, resulting in unnecessary conflict. I also think that you need to be a fan of literary fiction in order to like this book. Fortunately for me, though, literary fiction is one of my favorite genres, so I absolutely loved this book. I really appreciated the complexity and flaws with both Connell and Marianne. With Connell, I liked how he was responsible and acted as the mature one in his friend group. Whenever he was the driver, he stayed sober. He wasn't afraid to call out his friends when they were making inappropriate comments or decisions. However, that doesn't mean that he was perfect. The way he treated Marianne in high school was so degrading. He valued his image more than Marianne as a human being. And even though Marianne is undoubtedly weird, she deserved better than him at the time. And when Connell had other girlfriends, he was very detached. Some of it was mental health related, so it wasn't completely his fault, but it was also his inability to let go of Marianne, which these other women didn't deserve. With Marianne, she was unapologetically strange. It's bad to say, but I do understand why it affected her social image in high school. I do like that she stayed true to herself throughout the entire book, but I also think she put a lot of unnecessary pressure on Connell. Every time Connell was friendly with another woman, Marianne became convinced that he was in love with them and not her, and this was a cycle that she could never get out of. So neither of them was perfect, but I think it's this type of balance that makes a character feel well-rounded. Between the two, I particularly liked Connell. I found him to be very identifiable. I related to a lot of the things he was feeling regarding friendships and social circles and the idea of a changed hometown. I had never seen that experience described in a book before, so it made me feel very seen. I can understand that lots of people don't share this experience and might find Connell harder to identify with, but I really connected with him. I also found the mental health depictions to be quite real. Connell is struggling with the idea of being alone. He knows that there are people around him, but he doesn't feel close to anyone. He feels like he has to take on life by himself because there's no one he can turn to. And Marianne is battling this idea of self-worth. She doesn't care about popularity, but she accepts the treatment that she believes she deserves. And because so many people have put her down, that's all she knows. I think these are really raw and honest things that young people experience, and I appreciated seeing them present and addressed. To decorate this spread, I used a lilac sticker sheet from Mary Ann Sew on Etsy. I paired it with some scrapbooking paper from my local dollar store, a grid washi tape from Ikigai Papier, and a washi tape from Hobby Lobby. Normal People feels very different from the other books I've read so far this year, and maybe I just needed a change and this happened to be that, but I am actually a bit surprised at just how much I enjoyed this book. I understand that it's not for everyone, but it was definitely for me. I gave Normal People 5 stars. I'd say that in terms of author introductions, this went very well, and I will absolutely be exploring more Sally Rooney in the future. And this concludes my June reading journal wrap-up. I knew that June wasn't going to be a super productive month in terms of reading because I graduated earlier in the month and I did some traveling. So I'm happy that I was even able to get 3 books in, but I would say that this was a relatively disappointing month. Yes, I loved Normal People, but I was disappointed with the other 2, and I felt like they really brought the morale of the month down. My desire to read was pretty low, but I'm going to try and ride the success of Normal People into July and hope for the best. But until then, thank you very much for watching. Have a great rest of your day.